The ability to have somebody who is kind of epitomises what you think your country stands for has always been a major ambition.
I'm 75 now, and I can't remember anybody except the Queen being there.
Princess Anne stands unyielding, her demand echoing like thunder. Queen Camilla must return Queen Elizabeth's most treasured jewels immediately. The shockwave is instant. Inside palace walls, outrage clashes with disbelief, while across Britain, whispers of betrayal ignite. Was this Camilla's desperate act of grief, a power play, or a secret long concealed? Advisors scramble, aides tremble, and the monarchy itself quivers under the weight of scandal. One question consumes the nation. How far will Anne go if Camilla refuses? The battle has only begun.
I think my mother did exactly the right thing. I think it's absolutely extraordinary that any right-minded thinking parent should believe that it would have been an alternative.
She has been part of our lives forever.
Anne's fury over Elizabeth's vanished legacy. Princess Anne has never been one to soften her words or disguise her feelings. For decades, she has carried a reputation as the most direct of the Windsors, a woman who speaks as she finds, who values loyalty above appearances. And now, in the wake of her mother's death, that steel has turned into fire. Her confrontation with Queen Camilla was not just about glittering heirlooms. It was about legacy, about history, about the very foundation of what the monarchy claims to represent. The storm began quietly, deep inside Windsor Castle. After Queen Elizabeth II's passing, royal archivists followed tradition, embarking on the solemn task of cataloguing the late monarch's possessions. This was a process that had been repeated after the deaths of kings and queens for centuries, a careful accounting of what was left behind, what belonged to the crown, and what had been personal. But this time, something was wrong. As the archivists moved through the vaults, they discovered gaps, jarring absences where priceless relics should have been. The discovery spread quickly among a select few, but no one dared breathe a word in public. At first, Buckingham Palace tried to smother the whispers. Officials refused comment, locked doors, and swore silence. But rumors travel fast in royal corridors, and they soon reached the one person least likely to let them rest: Princess Anne. Everywhere she turned, the murmurs followed. Jewels missing, pieces vanishing, explanations thin and unconvincing. And for a woman who has spent her life defending her mother's memory, this was intolerable. The jewels in question were not mere adornments. They were pieces woven into the story of Britain itself. One was a diamond flower brooch, first pressed into Elizabeth's hands by Queen Victoria on the eve of her coronation, a gift symbolizing continuity and duty. That brooch had vanished without a trace. Another was the famed sapphire and diamond necklace, an iconic treasure Elizabeth wore on state occasions, a piece that glistened as a silent promise of the Commonwealth's endurance. Now that, too, was gone. These were not just precious stones, they were tangible fragments of the monarchy's soul. To lose them was to lose the thread connecting one reign to the next. Without them, it was as if someone had torn out chapters from the national story. For those inside the palace, panic was the only response. Orders came down with brutal clarity. Silence must be absolute. No leaks, no acknowledgement, no hint of scandal reaching the outside world. But silence has never been Anne's way. When she confronted Camilla, it was with a calm exterior masking a controlled fury. Her words were precise, but they carried the weight of a lifetime of loyalty to her mother. She wasn't there to shield reputations or to protect an institution already scarred by crises. She was there to demand the truth. To Anne, these jewels were not possessions to be hoarded or misplaced. They were living symbols of Elizabeth's 70 years on the throne, reminders of sacrifice, service, and endurance. And in her eyes, Their disappearance was nothing short of betrayal. So what deeper betrayal could shake a dynasty more? Missing jewels? Or shattered trust within its walls? Keep watching. The broken chain of inheritance. Anne could not escape the memory of her mother's last words, spoken in quiet, fading breaths before the end. Queen Elizabeth had made her feelings unmistakable. The worth of her treasures was not measured in carats, nor could it be captured by a jeweler's appraisal. Their true weight was in duty, in history, in the very identity of the monarchy itself. Each jewel was a vessel of memory, a link across generations, a sacred reminder of service and sacrifice. They were never meant to be trinkets or ornaments. They were promises. The Queen had even left clear instructions for their future. The Victorian diamond brooch, a piece passed from one royal woman to another for over a century, had been earmarked for Anne herself, a symbol of strength and endurance that mirrored her own character. The sapphire pendant, a dazzling gem tied to moments of state and ceremony, had been reserved for young Princess Charlotte, Elizabeth's great-granddaughter, as a gift to guide her into a future role she did not yet understand. These were not arbitrary choices. They were a carefully laid map of legacy, crafted by a monarch who had spent 70 years binding the family's past to its future. And yet, that sacred order had been disturbed. Somewhere along the line, someone had broken the chain. For Anne, the realization was like ice running through her veins. Nothing, no excuse, no error could justify such a breach. At first, palace aides attempted to soothe the rising tension. They murmured about clerical errors, about the confusion that naturally followed the chaos of a monarch's death. They insisted the process of transfer was complicated, that records could have been misplaced, that nothing sinister was at play. But Anne did not believe a word of it. The system for cataloging royal treasures had been watertight for centuries, tested through wars, abdications, and transitions. There were no errors here. What she saw were deliberate moves, choices made in the shadows. And behind those shadows, one figure's name began to surface with unnerving consistency. Camilla. The deeper Anne pressed, the more troubling the accounts became. Staff, their voices hushed with fear, admitted to seeing odd irregularities whenever items passed through the Queen Consort's hands. Jewels would appear at private gatherings without record, only to vanish again without explanation. Items noted one day would quietly disappear from the books the next. Nothing official, no statements, just a growing pattern of secrecy too sharp to dismiss as a coincidence. Anne's fury grew, though she kept her expression icy and composed. She knew better than to storm through Buckingham Palace or speak too soon. A public confrontation without evidence would backfire, turning scandal into spectacle. Instead, she wielded her anger like a blade kept hidden in its sheath, sharp, controlled, and waiting for the right moment to strike. She had weathered decades of palace intrigue. She understood patience as well as persistence. To Anne, the jewels were lifeblood. To Camilla, it seemed, they were decorations, symbols to be displayed, not guardianships to be honored. If the whispers were true, Camilla had treated these sacred pieces as if her new crown entitled her to more than duty, as though she could redefine legacy itself. But what she carried in secret was not just treasure. It was betrayal. It was love and ancestry twisted into something Anne could never forgive. And then, without warning, came the first crack in the silence. A revelation from someone tied not to Windsor's present, but to Camilla's past. But what hidden truths could force Camilla's past into the light, shattering silence and loyalty alike? Was the vault her final undoing? Stay with us. The vault in the shadows. The breakthrough came not with fanfare or noise, but in a hushed, urgent voice that carried the weight of danger. The message reached Anne outside the castle walls, far from the marble corridors where whispers had begun to tighten like a noose. It was a voice she had not heard in years, Camilla's former personal assistant. Her tone was measured, every word chosen with the care of someone diffusing an explosive. This was not idle gossip or speculation. What she carried was far more dangerous. She carried proof. With deliberate calm, the former aide revealed the existence of something that should never have existed at all: a hidden vault. Not in the archives of Windsor or the guarded repositories of government, but in Ray Mill House, Camilla's private retreat in Wiltshire. Beneath its walls lay a chamber under constant surveillance, sealed away from official oversight, a vault tucked into secrecy where prying eyes could not reach. Inside, she said, priceless relics of Queen Elizabeth's reign had been spirited away, removed from palace control and locked in private keeping. Anne sat in silence as the words sank in. Every detail was another blow, a piece of a puzzle snapping into place with chilling clarity. Camilla had not merely borrowed or misplaced items, as palace excuses had suggested. She had removed them. Among the treasures allegedly hidden at Raymill was one of the crown's most dazzling pieces, the emerald and diamond choker that had once gleamed at Elizabeth's throat, a jewel that had not appeared in any official record since her passing in 2022. The last time it was seen was at a discreet diplomatic gala, and Camilla's explanation then, that it was simply in family safekeeping, had done nothing to quell suspicion. For Anne, that phrase rang hollow. Who had given authorization? Where were the records? And why were items belonging to the Crown Collection Trust suddenly treated like private ornaments? To Anne, the pattern was unmistakable. This was no accident. It was concealment. But Anne was not reckless. She confided in no one, not Charles, not even her most trusted companions. Instead, she acted in her trademark style, sudden, precise, decisive. She reached out to two officers of the Royal Protection Command, men bound by silence and loyalty, men she trusted as immovable as stone. Their instructions were clear. Investigate Raymill House. Find the truth. What they uncovered erased every shred of doubt. Hidden beneath layers of restricted access, the vault was real. Records had been scrubbed, digital traces wiped clean, paper logs destroyed as though someone had deliberately erased history. But the protection officers worked quietly, photographing and cataloging each discovery. And the evidence was devastating. Dozens of items tied directly to Elizabeth had been relocated. Each one had been relabeled with false family tags, disguising them from the official system that safeguarded the royal collection. It was deception in its purest form, deliberate, calculated, undeniable. Anne knew then that the line had been crossed. This was not a clerical error. It was not confusion. It was theft, concealed in secrecy and shielded by power. Reports later whispered that Anne confronted Camilla with the fury of her mother's final wishes, reminding her of the instructions Elizabeth had left behind, the very ones Camilla is said to have hidden after 2022. When word of the vault began to circulate in guarded circles, it struck the monarchy like a silent earthquake. And for Anne, the sight of that emerald necklace, once described by Elizabeth as a symbol of balance between heritage and restraint, reduced to a cold photograph in a hidden vault, stripped of meaning, stripped of context, was nothing less than desecration. But when whispers of Camilla's secret vault shook the palace, was this mere scandal, or the monarchy's deepest betrayal yet? Stay glued. The reckoning at Clarence House. By now it was no longer about jewels locked away in velvet cases. What unfolded was something far heavier, an attempt to reshape memory itself. Camilla had not just taken possession of glittering heirlooms. She had tried to claim symbols of Elizabeth's reign, weaving them into her own image as though history could be rewritten with diamonds and emeralds. But in that effort, she made a fatal miscalculation. She believed she could quietly outmaneuver Anne, forgetting that Anne was the daughter who had stood unflinchingly beside her mother through wars, through scandals, through storms that had tested the monarchy's very survival. Camilla underestimated her. And now, the reckoning had arrived. For Anne, this was not about gemstones or brooches. It was about something infinitely more sacred: the theft of trust, the erasure of memory, the violation of tradition that had endured for centuries. These treasures were not Camilla's to hoard, not relics to be hidden in a private vault. They belonged to the crown, to the people, and to the story of a nation. What had once been whispers had now solidified into undeniable facts. And facts demanded confrontation. That day, Clarence House carried an atmosphere unlike any ceremony it had hosted before. The air was heavy, charged, as though the walls themselves knew what was about to erupt within them. Anne arrived without fanfare, without warning. Her footsteps were sharp, echoing through the halls with a rhythm of resolve. Her face was set, steady, giving nothing away. Two senior aides walked at her side, their silence mirroring her determination. No cameras were waiting, no polite courtesies, no rehearsed gestures of diplomacy. This was not a meeting. It was a battle. Across the chamber, Camilla looked up and faltered. The queen consort, so often composed, was caught off guard. There had been no time to prepare, no chance to polish explanations. Shock flickered across her face as silence pressed in around her, thicker than the air before a storm. And then the storm broke. Anne's voice sliced through the room, unflinching, unrestrained, each word crashing like thunder. The jewels, she declared, had never belonged to Camilla. They were not trinkets to be stored behind locked doors, but symbols of the monarchy's soul. Every missing piece was a stolen thread from Britain's story. Camilla tried to steady herself, forcing a hollow laugh, waving off Anne's accusations as absurd. But the performance crumbled quickly. Anne pressed harder. She named the secret vault at Raymill House. She listed the missing heirlooms, the broken chain of inheritance, the betrayal of her mother's final wishes. The mask Camilla wore began to fracture. Her voice turned defensive, her breath unsteady. Panic edged into her eyes as she offered excuses, clerical errors, confusion in the days after Elizabeth's death. But the words were brittle, collapsing under their own weight. And then Anne delivered the strike that shattered the room. From her hands slid a heavy leather-bound dossier across the polished table. Inside lay photographs of the vault itself, detailed inventories matched against the official royal collection, and statements signed by former staffers confirming Camilla's direct role in the transfer. Each page was a weapon. Each image is a wound. Anne had brought not just suspicion, but proof. And with it, the fight for Elizabeth's legacy had erupted into the open. So what happens when undeniable proof pierces royal walls? Does loyalty shatter or harden into defiance? The treasures now threatened to divide everything. The treasures that divided a crown. The moment could no longer be avoided. The glittering symbols of power, the emerald necklace, the Victorian sapphire brooch, even the beloved Diana pearls, had been traced, catalogued, and confirmed. Each piece stood as undeniable proof, each one dismantling Camilla's fragile defense. The excuses she had clung to dissolved under the sheer weight of evidence, leaving her cornered. And yet, she refused to bow. With her pride trembling but her chin defiantly lifted, Camilla declared that as queen consort, it was her duty to guard Elizabeth's legacy in her own way. Her voice rose with drama, almost desperation, as she insisted that the public had already accepted her place beside the crown. But Anne would not be swayed. Her words cut through Camilla's performance with surgical precision. "Respect isn't inherited," she said with cold finality. "It's earned." There was no mistaking her meaning. Elizabeth's wishes for these jewels had been clear. These were treasures meant to live within the royal collection, not adorn Camilla's claim to power. Anne's ultimatum was issued with icy force. Return the jewels immediately, without excuse or deception, or she would expose the truth herself. There would be no polished statements, no quiet denials, only the unvarnished truth delivered to the British people, a people who still cherished Elizabeth's memory more fiercely than the spectacle of a new reign. Silence fell. Camilla did not answer, but her refusal to retreat filled the room with suffocating tension. She sat in stillness, her silence louder than any denial. To yield would be humiliation. To resist was dangerous. But Camilla had weathered storms before, decades of merciless public scrutiny, waves of judgment that would have destroyed someone weaker. This was not a surrender. This was a strategy. Anne left Clarence's house convinced she had shaken Camilla. Instead, she had ignited her. Within hours, Camilla struck back with precision. She did not rally advisors, nor did she summon allies. She went directly to King Charles, privately, without witnesses, without proof of her own, but with something far more powerful: manipulation. Where Anne saw herself as a protector of tradition, Camilla painted her as reckless, unstable, and dangerous. She recast Anne's righteous confrontation as a humiliating ambush inside her own home, twisting the narrative to her advantage. Charles, already staggering under the crushing demands of transition, now found himself torn in two. On one side stood his sister, the unyielding embodiment of discipline and the monarchy's most loyal guardian. On the other stood his wife, the woman who had weathered scandal at his side, the partner who had carried him to the throne. Camilla pressed her advantage with careful precision. Her words mixed subtle threats with emotional pleas. She warned that Anne's defiance, if left unchecked, could unleash a media storm capable of tearing the monarchy apart. And Charles, caught between loyalty to family and devotion to his crown, found himself facing a decision that could fracture the very foundation of his reign. But as whispers turned to open rifts, could Charles choose between blood and crown, or would the palace itself collapse? Stay tuned. Shadows in the palace. Camilla's maneuvering did not end with Charles. Behind the gilded doors of the palace, she moved with quiet calculation, weaving her influence like an invisible web. Whisper by whisper, she sowed doubt about Anne's judgment, suggesting to senior advisors that her sister-in-law's growing authority was dangerous, even erratic. It was a strategy as old as court politics itself: turn allies into skeptics, skeptics into enemies. Slowly, she gathered a circle of courtiers who feared Anne's unshakable popularity, stacking the odds in her own favor. Her boldest strike came in the form of a document slipped discreetly to King Charles. It was only a draft decree, unsigned and unofficial, but its meaning was unmistakable. The proposal cut deeply. It recommended that Anne's ceremonial duties be sharply reduced. The harshest blow lay buried in its final clause: the suggestion that Princess Anne be removed from future Order of the Garter ceremonies, one of the oldest and most sacred traditions of the monarchy. This was more than politics. It was an attempt to diminish Anne's legacy, to erase her from the very fabric of royal history. The document rippled through the palace like a tremor. Advisors whispered in panic, some daring to question Camilla's motives but most staying silent, unwilling to risk their own standing. A few, sensing where the wind was blowing, fell in line, repeating Camilla's narrative to secure their place in her growing sphere of power. The once unified court was fracturing into factions, and every corridor, every hushed conversation carried the tension of a house divided against itself. Amid this turmoil, one voice reached Anne with clarity and loyalty: It was Prince William, her nephew, the heir who would one day inherit the throne. He came not with grand speeches, but with a sharp, quiet warning. Tread carefully. Your fight with Camilla has spread further than you think. William did not urge her to step back, nor did he question her cause. Instead, he acknowledged the truth of what she had uncovered and reminded her of the stakes. Later that night, alone in her study, Anne read the draft decree by lamplight. The words before her were meant to crush, but instead they steeled her. This was no longer about a necklace or brooch. It was about something far larger, the integrity of the crown itself. To surrender now would be to allow manipulation and entitlement to corrode the legacy her mother had built with such precision and sacrifice. Anne's mind drifted back to those years when Camilla had held little sway, when palace politics were shaped by Elizabeth's steady hand. She knew with certainty that her mother, meticulous and deliberate, would never have left her most cherished jewels to chance. Deep within the royal archives lay proof, a sealed envelope marked with Elizabeth II's private cipher, unopened since her passing. Many had assumed it contained only ceremonial farewells, perhaps blessings for the family. But when its seal was finally broken, its contents carried the weight of a lifetime. Inside was Elizabeth's handwritten letter, her words intimate and piercing. She described the monarchy not as a machine of power, but as a living story of duty, sacrifice, and guardianship. The jewels, she wrote, were not ornaments of authority. They were vessels of memory, fragments of ancestry, bridges between generations. One by one she named them, assigning meaning rather than value. The sapphire necklace, long rumored to be worth a fortune, was destined for Princess Charlotte, her great-granddaughter. Elizabeth called it a link between past and future, meant to carry the strength of their bloodline. And then came the passage about Camilla. The tone was courteous, respectful, but laced with unmistakable caution. Elizabeth feared that Camilla would see these treasures not as living threads of legacy, but as tokens of authority, symbols to wield, rather than to guard. And just how far could Camilla bend legacy into power? And when duty collides with ambition, who truly safeguards the crown's future? The Reckoning. At Balmoral. From across the Atlantic, a voice long distant from palace corridors suddenly cut into the storm. Prince Harry, watching the unfolding scandal from California, could not remain silent. He did not call his father, nor did he reach for William. Instead, he picked up the phone and spoke directly to Anne. With hesitation, yet with conviction, he shared a memory that weighed heavily on him, something his mother had once confided. Diana, he recalled, had warned him about heirlooms. They had a way of vanishing when new titles were given and new brides entered the fold. She had shown Harry pieces from her personal collection, carefully distinguishing between treasures meant for the people and those reserved only for women who had served the crown with dignity. Among her letters and photographs, Harry still kept evidence. Notes in Diana's unmistakable handwriting and an image of a pearl bracelet, now missing from the archives, but unmistakably hers. Legacy, Harry reminded Anne, does not always shine like diamonds. Sometimes it is hidden in warnings, in truths passed down quietly from one generation to the next. And in Diana's notes, one line stood out like a flare in the night. Be careful what is claimed in marriage. Not all that shines comes from love. It was not an accusation, but a warning, and in the present moment, it felt prophetic. Harry did not hesitate. He encrypted the letters, the photographs, the testimony, and sent them to Anne. When she told him his mother's words might restore what had been stolen, Harry's answer was simple, unwavering. Use them. With that, Diana's voice, silent for decades, entered the battle, sharpening it into something raw, undeniable, and impossible to bury. The revelation split the monarchy further still. Charles stood paralyzed, caught between his wife's grasp at power and his son's defense of Diana's memory. Anne, though grateful for Harry's loyalty, kept her focus razor sharp. She warned him softly. Once this door opened, it would never close again. Camilla, cornered but unwilling to yield, played her final card. At a glittering charity gala, she appeared smiling, confident, and defiantly adorned with the very Victorian brooch Anne had been tracking. She brushed it off as a simple mix-up, declaring, "I wear this today in reverence to the traditions Her late Majesty held dear. I belong here. Every right belongs to me." But Anne answered differently. Hours later, at a veteran's memorial, she wore nothing of grandeur, no crown, no jewels, only a plain regimental pin and a single red poppy her mother had once fixed to her collar. She spoke softly, not of scandal, but of service. True heritage does not require spectacle. It requires honor. The contrast was electrifying. Camilla's performance seemed hollow. Anne's quiet dignity struck like lightning, reigniting the scandal with greater force. The inevitable reckoning came at Balmoral Castle, the most sacred of royal retreats. Behind heavy doors, Anne and Camilla faced each other at last, with the impartial Duke of Kent seated as witness. Anne laid everything bare: Elizabeth's handwritten letter, the vault's inventory, sworn staff testimony, and now Diana's notes validated by Harry. The evidence was crushing. Camilla, pale and trembling, pleaded one final time. She claimed she had only acted to preserve her spirit, to keep her place within history. Anne's reply was swift, her voice cold and unshaking. "Legacy isn't something you wear. It is something you safeguard. And you nearly destroyed what you were so desperate to display." Camilla's resolve shattered. Realizing the fight was lost, she agreed to return every heirloom, but only under the condition that the matter would never be spoken of again. Anne accepted for the sake of unity, yet her gaze made the truth undeniable. Silence did not mean forgiveness. As the meeting closed, Anne delivered her final warning, slow and unforgettable. "Steal from the crown again, and I won't just knock. Doors will be demolished." Weeks later, the missing treasures quietly reappeared in the royal collection. No announcements, no press releases, no acknowledgements. Yet inside palace walls, the shift was unmistakable. Anne stood tall, unyielding, the defender of integrity. Camilla remained beside the king, her crown intact, but her authority fractured, her ambitions scarred. The jewels were restored. The trust was not. The monarchy carried wounds deeper than gold or diamonds could ever heal. So, what do you think? Did Anne's unshakable stand truly save the monarchy's honor? Or has the crown's trust been damaged forever? We'd like to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.